Ladies and gentlemen, niceness is something many of us are taught to value from a young age. Be nice, be polite, don't rock the boat, smile even when you're uncomfortable. For many people, especially those who have grown up in environments where conflict was unsafe or unpredictable, niceness becomes a survival strategy. We learn to prioritize other people's comfort over our own truth. We believe that if we're nice enough, agreeable enough, kind enough, maybe we won't be rejected, hurt, or abandoned. But here's the hard truth. Niceness is not the same as boundaries. Niceness often says, I'll do whatever it takes to keep the peace, even if it costs me my own. Boundaries, on the other hand, say, I can be kind and still tell you the truth. I can care about you and still protect my peace. One is rooted in fear of disconnection, the other is grounded in self-respect and clarity. There's nothing inherently wrong with being nice. It's beautiful to be thoughtful, compassionate, and caring. But when our niceness becomes a way to earn worth or maintain safety in relationships where our needs aren't respected, it stops being kindness and becomes self-erasure. That's not generosity. That's exhaustion in disguise. Boundaries, unlike niceness, require us to tolerate discomfort. They demand that we face the possibility that someone may not like what we have to say or how we assert ourselves. Boundaries are about clarity. They're about saying, this is okay with me and this is not. They don't need to be loud or harsh. They can be soft and steady like a lighthouse in a storm, but they're non-negotiable. In relationships with emotionally manipulative or narcissistic individuals, niceness often becomes a tool they use against us. When someone consistently disregards your needs, invalidates your emotions, or shifts blame every time you express pain, niceness doesn't change that dynamic. In fact, it often reinforces it. It teaches them that you'll tolerate being minimized as long as you get to avoid confrontation, that you'll keep showing up with empathy even when they show up with entitlement. That you'll sacrifice your peace just to maintain proximity. That's not love, that's not connection. That's a loop of emotional labor that never pays out. Real love, healthy love, respects boundaries. It may not always like them. It may even challenge them from time to time. But it recognizes that mutual respect is the foundation of any meaningful relationship. A narcissist doesn't operate from that place. And no amount of niceness will change someone who is deeply committed to being right, to being in control, or to avoiding accountability at all costs. The truth is, when you start setting boundaries, people who have benefited from your lack of them will get uncomfortable. They'll push back. They might accuse you of being mean, selfish, cold, or dramatic. That's not a sign you're doing something wrong. That's a sign you're disrupting a dynamic that was never fair to begin with. We have to get clear on this. Setting a boundary isn't a betrayal. It's an act of self-trust. It's telling yourself, I believe that my well-being matters. I believe that my voice matters. I believe that I'm allowed to take up space in my own life. And that doesn't mean being unkind or disrespectful. It means being anchored in your truth. Niceness is often externally focused. What do they need from me? How can I make them feel better? Boundaries are internally rooted. What do I need from me? What do I need to feel safe, respected, and whole? One looks outward and asks, how do I keep the peace? The other looks inward and asks, what do I need to stay at peace within myself? We think that being nice will make people like us, make them treat us better, make the relationship safer, but that's not how respect works. Respect isn't earned by how agreeable you are. It's commanded by how clearly you show up for yourself. This isn't about becoming hardened or closed off. In fact, boundaries are what allow us to be more open, more present, more authentic, because we're not constantly abandoning ourselves to stay connected. When you have boundaries, your yes actually means yes, because you know you're free to say no. Your compassion comes from a full cup, not a depleted spirit, and your relationships start to reflect mutuality, not one-sided sacrifice. Niceness may feel good in the moment, but it often comes at the cost of long-term resentment. Boundaries might feel uncomfortable at first, but they lead to real freedom. You get to stop performing. You get to stop tiptoeing. You get to stand in your truth, and the people who truly care about you, who are capable of connection, of growth, of shared vulnerability, they won't leave because you set boundaries. They'll adjust. They'll listen. They'll grow with you, but the ones who don't, the ones who only stayed because they could benefit from your silence, your overgiving, your fear of rocking the boat, they were never choosing you. They were choosing your compliance. So no, being nice won't change someone who is committed to misunderstanding you, but choosing boundaries, that will change everything, starting with you. Change doesn't begin when we keep everyone else comfortable. It begins when we stop betraying ourselves, and for many of us, that means learning to trade compliance for courage. Compliance is the path we take when we're afraid. We go along to get along. We say yes when we want to say no. We shrink to avoid conflict. We minimize our needs to avoid being seen as too much. Compliance keeps the peace, but not the kind of peace that nourishes. It's the kind that silences, the kind that slowly chips away at our sense of self until we don't recognize who we are anymore. We don't choose compliance because we're weak. We choose it because we've been conditioned to believe it's safer than speaking up. Maybe you were raised in a household where love felt conditional, where your needs were met only if you were good, quiet, helpful, invisible. Maybe you learned that upsetting someone meant emotional withdrawal, guilt, tripping, or rage. Over time, you internalized the idea that your safety, your belonging, and even your worth depended on how agreeable you could be. So you complied, you bent, you made yourself small, and it worked, sort of. You stayed connected, but only at the cost of your authenticity. The problem is, compliance never leads to genuine change. It leads to resentment. It leads to burnout. And it leads to a life where you're always performing, always managing other people's emotions, always trying to prevent the next explosion, disappointment, or withdrawal. You end up living on emotional eggshells, afraid that one moment of honesty could cause everything to fall apart. That's not sustainable, and it's certainly not love. Courage is a different path. It's not louder. It's not meaner, but it's honest. Courage says, I'm willing to be misunderstood in order to be whole. It says, I can't keep abandoning myself just to stay in someone's good graces. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, this isn't working for me anymore. Even if your voice shakes while saying it. When you begin to choose courage over compliance, everything shifts. You start having the hard conversations you used to avoid. You start telling the truth about what hurts. You stop pretending things are fine when they are not. And yes, that may cause conflict. People who benefited from your silence won't always welcome your voice. But that discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're breaking a cycle. People who rely on control, manipulation, or guilt to get their way will always prefer compliance. They want you pliable, predictable, passive, because your courage, your willingness to challenge the dynamic, threatens the power imbalance they've come to rely on. But that's not your problem to fix. Your job is not to keep someone else emotionally regulated at the cost of your own mental health. Your job is to tell the truth, even if it's hard, especially when it's hard. Choosing courage doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring in a healthier way. You begin to understand that love without honesty isn't love, it's a performance. And that boundaries aren't cruel. They're clarity. You can't truly connect with someone if you're always editing yourself to fit their comfort zone. You can't feel safe with someone if you're constantly censoring your needs just to be tolerated. Courage means trusting that your truth is valid, even if it's inconvenient for someone else. It's easy to believe that if we just keep doing the right things, keep being nice, patient, flexible, they'll eventually change. But people don't change because we make ourselves smaller. They change if they choose to when they're faced with truth. With consequences, with the absence of the system that enables their behavior. Your silence doesn't make them better. You're people. Pleasing doesn't make them grow. If anything, it allows them to avoid the very discomfort that growth requires. Courage might look like saying, "I love you, but this dynamic isn't healthy for me." It might look like walking away from a relationship where your voice is never heard. It might look like telling someone, "No, I won't do that anymore," and sticking to it even when they push back. It might look like choosing your peace over their approval. None of that is easy, but it's the only way things ever truly change. There's a moment in all of us, quiet, but undeniable, where we realize that compliance isn't sustainable. Where we get tired of pretending, tired of managing everything and everyone but ourselves. And in that moment, if we're willing to be brave, even just a little, we begin to reclaim our power, not to control anyone else, but to finally live in alignment with ourselves. Change starts when we stop outsourcing our value, when we stop negotiating our worth in exchange for temporary belonging, when we decide that we'd rather be honest and alone than compliant and resentful. That's where real transformation begins, not in pleasing others, but in honoring ourselves. Courage is not a destination, it's a daily practice. It's messy and imperfect, but it's the birthplace of freedom, authenticity, and peace. And it's always worth choosing, even when compliance feels safer, because compliance might preserve the illusion of connection, but only courage can create the real thing. There's a deep and painful truth that many of us have to learn the hard way. You can't negotiate with someone who refuses to meet you in vulnerability. You can try, you can beg, you can reason, over-explain, justify, and soften your words to avoid triggering their defenses. But if someone is committed to avoiding vulnerability, if they are unwilling to be honest about their own fears, flaws, and emotions, then no amount of effort on your part will create real connection. Because connection, by its very nature, requires two people willing to show up fully. When someone refuses vulnerability, they aren't just shutting you out emotionally, they are making a choice to keep the power dynamic skewed. Vulnerability requires humility. It requires admitting, "I was wrong." It requires sitting with discomfort. But people who fear vulnerability often see it as weakness or loss of control. So instead of engaging honestly, they deflect, blame, gaslight, or avoid. They rewrite the story so that they're always the victim or the hero, never the one who hurt someone else. Trying to build a relationship with someone like that is like trying to dance with someone who refuses to move. You keep spinning, twisting, bending, trying to lead and follow all at once, but they stay rooted in place. Eventually, you end up dancing alone. This doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. It's the partner who shuts down every time you bring up an issue. It's the friend who changes the subject when you talk about your pain. It's the parent who dismisses your feelings with, "It wasn't that bad." These moments may seem small, but over time they create a canyon of disconnection, because vulnerability isn't optional, it's foundational. Without it, trust can't grow, and without trust, there's no relationship. Just a transaction, a performance, a series of roles we play to avoid rocking the boat. You end up walking on eggshells, managing their emotions instead of expressing your own. You end up negotiating with a wall, hoping it will one day respond like a person. It's tempting to believe that if you just love them enough, they'll finally open up. That if you're patient, kind, understanding, if you keep showing them how safe you are, they'll eventually meet you in the middle. And maybe that's true for some people some of the time, but for others, especially those who have built their identity around control, perfectionism, or emotional detachment, vulnerability feels like a threat. And if they are not willing to challenge that narrative, nothing you do will make them change. The danger is in trying to reach them. You can lose yourself. You start doubting your perceptions. You silence your voice. You lower your expectations not because you're unreasonable, but because you're tired of being disappointed. You tell yourself, "Maybe I'm asking too much," when all you're really asking for is mutual respect and emotional honesty. The heartbreaking part is, you might still love them. You might see their pain, their history, their wounds. You might empathize with why they shut down or lash out, and that empathy is beautiful, but it can't come at the cost of your own emotional safety. Understanding someone is not the same as staying in a dynamic that consistently harms you. Vulnerability is not about spilling your guts or being emotionally raw all the time. It's about being real. It's the willingness to say, "This hurt me. I need more. I'm scared." It's about showing up as your full self and being willing to sit with someone else's full self too. It's a mutual exchange, not a performance, not a manipulation, not a power play. And if that mutuality is missing, the relationship becomes lopsided. You end up doing all the emotional labor. You initiate every hard conversation. You soothe, explain, interpret, and translate your needs into something palatable for them. You become the emotional scaffolding holding everything up. And if you stop, even for a moment, the whole thing crumbles. That's not love, that's survival. Real intimacy requires two people who are willing to be uncomfortable together, to look at the messy parts, to own their impact, to sit in the tension without rushing to fix it or blame someone else. If you're the only one willing to go there, it's not a partnership. It's a performance you're starring in alone. Eventually, you have to make a decision, not out of anger, not even out of despair, but out of self-respect. You have to recognize that your need for connection, truth, and emotional safety is not a flaw. It's not too much. It's the foundation of every meaningful relationship. And if someone can't or won't meet you there, it's okay to walk away, not to punish them, not to prove a point, but to protect your own capacity for love, for hope, for healing. You can't force someone into vulnerability. You can invite them, model it, create space for it. But they have to choose it, and if they don't, you're allowed to choose yourself. Because being met in vulnerability isn't a luxury. It's the bare minimum for real, reciprocal connection, and you deserve nothing less. It's a hard truth to accept, especially for those of us who are deeply empathetic, that we are not responsible for someone else's healing. We can care, we can listen, we can hold space, but we can't do the work for them. Healing is an inside job, and no amount of love, patience, or understanding will be enough for someone who refuses to take responsibility for their own growth. And while it's noble to want to help, to fix, to be the one who saves or soothes, it can quickly turn into a trap, one where you sacrifice your own peace trying to rescue someone who doesn't want to be rescued. There's a difference between support and self-sacrifice. It's one thing to be present for someone you care about, to encourage their growth, to be a safe space when they're struggling. But when your peace is constantly disrupted, when your emotional energy is drained, when your needs are neglected or dismissed, all in the name of helping someone else heal, that's not compassion, that's self-abandonment. We live in a culture that romanticizes the idea of loving someone through their damage, of being the one who helps them see the light, of sticking around no matter what. It sounds poetic. It feels loyal. But what often gets left out of that narrative is how much it costs the one doing all the emotional labor. You end up carrying a weight that was never meant to be yours. You start to believe that if you could just say the right thing, show up the right way, be just a little more patient, then maybe they'll finally change, maybe they'll finally see your worth, maybe they'll finally get better. But people don't heal because we want them to. They heal because they choose to. And until they're ready to make that choice, no amount of effort on your part will shift the dynamic. What it will do, however, is slowly erode your sense of self. You'll lose sleep, question your sanity, and feel guilty for needing space. You'll silence your own pain because theirs seems bigger. You'll stay in situations that feel emotionally unsafe because you're afraid that leaving means you've given up on them. That's not healing, that's harm. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to prioritize your peace. You are allowed to say, "I love you, but I can't keep doing this." That doesn't make you heartless. It makes you human, There's a difference between being there for someone and being consumed by them. There's a difference between holding space and being held hostage by their trauma. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. Not with bitterness, not with anger, but with clarity. Because staying in a dynamic where your emotional well-being is constantly compromised isn't love, it's fear. Fear of being selfish, fear of being seen as cold. Fear of what will happen to them if you walk away. But here's the truth, their healing is not your job. It never was, and you do not have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Peace is not something you earn after everyone else is okay. Peace is something you are allowed to claim even when others are struggling. It's not a prize, it's a boundary, and it's often the thing that saves you when everything else is falling apart. Choosing your peace doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop overfunctioning. It means you stop trying to control what isn't yours to control. It means you recognize that being a good person doesn't mean tolerating emotional chaos. You can be kind and still walk away. You can be understanding and still say, "This isn't healthy for me." You can hold love in your heart for someone and still know that being in their life is not sustainable. Peace is quiet. It doesn't demand. It doesn't control. It doesn't try to fix or force. Peace says, "I trust that whatever needs to unfold will unfold, but I will not destroy myself waiting for someone else to rise." Peace is what allows you to breathe again after years of holding your breath. It's what gives you room to grieve, to heal, to rediscover who you are outside of crisis. And sometimes choosing your peace is what finally creates space for them to face themselves. Sometimes your absence is what shakes them out of their denial. Not because you intended to teach them a lesson, but because you finally stopped shielding them from the consequences of their choices. That's not cruelty, that's reality. You can love someone and still leave. You can wish the best for them and still need distance. You can care deeply and still say no more, because your peace matters, your healing matters, and you don't have to prove your worth by how much pain you can endure in someone else's name. You are not a therapist, a savior, or a sponge for someone else's emotional wounds. You are a person with your own needs, your own heart, your own right to joy. Let them do their work. You do yours, and trust that healing, true healing, only begins when we take responsibility for ourselves. Because you are not responsible for their healing, but you are absolutely, unequivocally responsible for your peace.